Well, hello. Welcome everybody here and at home. Wait, this is not close enough? Okay. Welcome everybody here and at home. We're happy to have this occasion to get together after what sounds like a very successful Planet Unity. So yay, Unity, for making that magic happen. Because it was Earth Day on Friday, and yesterday was Planet Unity, and 2 days of Planet Unity in observation of Earth Day. I wanted to do two things. One is sort of revisit the conversation we had a few weeks ago where we were kind of all excited a little bit about poetry, and I wanted to keep that momentum going. But also, it's a good chance to talk about nature and poetry, because observation of nature is kind of the root of much poetry. I know a lot of people, they go out in nature and they sit, and that's where the material comes from. We also have a lot of complicated lives and things going on that we have things that cause us pain and things that confuse us, and we sometimes work that stuff out on the page, but our common point of reference is nature. So nature poetry is an absolute thing, and I thought maybe we should look into it a little bit. So this is a tree. I mentioned this the last time I talked. The field of semiotics says that if I say the word tree, that we all think of something different. You might think of a cartoon illustration of a tree, or you might think of the oak you used to swing on in your yard, or you might think of the tree you just planted after you decorated it for Christmas and put it in your yard. Tree doesn't communicate anything at all specific. Even if we try to make it specific with modifiers, we say birch tree, tall tree, elm tree, it's still, we all have a different tree in mind, and it's a wonder we can communicate at all under these circumstances when the words that we use are codes that we all read differently. So here's a picture of a tree. I thought, I'll find a nice picture of a tree. And then I liked this because it was so complicated with all these roots going into the ground. But it's not a beautiful tree on the hill like you might have expected. The complication was just right, I thought, for poetry. Now here's a poem that's super duper famous. I also think it's a charming poem and a sweet poem. And you know it, probably, you at least know the first two lines of it. It's, I will say, it's not necessarily the world's best poem, but it's a dear poem that people love. And let's look at it. It's by Joyce Kilmer. That's Sergeant Joyce Kilmer. He was a World War I soldier, killed in France. Wrote this before he went over and published it. He had a career as a New York Times reporter, and in France he was a scout. He scouted enemy lines, and he got killed doing that. So, but here's his reflection on trees. It's quite famous, and I hope you like it as much as I do. Trees. I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree whose hungry mouth is pressed against the earth's sweet flowing breast. A tree that looks at God all day and lifts her leafy arms to pray. A tree that may in summer wear a nest of robins in her hair, upon whose bosom snow has lain, who intimately lives with rain. Poems are made by fools like me, but only God can make a tree. Familiar turf, right? We all know this poem. We at least know the first little bit. I will say, it's not technically a very proficient poem. You want to know why? The rhymes are very obvious and predictable. There's no surprises in the language here. The images are a little hackneyed and cliched. A tree that looks at God all day and lifts her leafy arms to pray. The words aren't surprising, and the image isn't very surprising. And also at the end, he shows up unexpectedly. There's been nobody's like paved the way for this me to show up in the poem where it says poems are made by fools like me. This wasn't a poem about writing poems, right? But there he is. It's a if we had this in a workshop, we'd have a few things to say about it, right? It's just not that great, but it's enduring. Everybody knows this poem, and I find it charming, and I love this poem. So you like it too?
I do like it.
There's something about the sing-song quality and the predictable rhyme that puts it in the realm of like fairy tale or something, or Dr. Seuss. It just has that kind of comfort. Yeah.
I was going to say, isn't there something profound about the simplicity in some of the writings, and also, let's speak into this. Doesn't it also make it, more age appropriate for younger audience too?
Yeah, that could be. Paul says there's something about the simplicity that's appealing, and also that it's, as you heard, it's something a reader of any age can appreciate. And that's true. It's so simple. It just brings it down to its most basic. There's a lot of bosom talk that kids wouldn't probably have today. Back then, a breast and a bosom was just normal. But now it would be kind of weird to stick a breasts in your tree poem. But yeah, hi. True. It's something anybody can sort of take in, and that simplicity. The fact that this is somebody who died in World War I, very shortly after writing and publishing this poem, that makes the simplicity extra. There's extra pathos there because he loved the earth so much, and he's gone from it, taken by war. So, yeah. I don't mean to diminish Sergeant Kilmer's work because I, for some reason, love this, but I can see that it's a limited kind of poem, but it's one of the most famous poems there is. Let's look closely at this fellow. This is a grasshopper. And the next poem, I'm going to share a couple poems by Mary Oliver, kind of a nature poet, raised in among religion, but really found her own faith in nature. So the poem I'm going to read you, she looks closely at a grasshopper, this closely at a grasshopper, because she's Mary Oliver, and it's what she does. She stares at this guy all through lunch. She can't take her eyes off the grasshopper, and here's the poem that came from that. It ends with one of the most famous few lines, or maybe the most famous line in contemporary poetry. Contemporary, contempt, same time, lives when we do. Although she died recently. The summer day. I want to put this up so you can see it just a little bit better. Okay. I'm a Mac person. This is not my thing. Oh, it's not up there. Well, we'll go back to the slide. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean, the one who has flung herself out of the grass, the one who is eating sugar out of my hand, who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down, who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Such a great poem. Have you guys heard the poem before?
No.
What do you think? We can move the microphone around maybe. Anybody have any reflections on the?
Raise your hand, sorry.
Okay, I'll say something.
She gave it a thumbs up.
Well, I was giving a thumbs up because I really liked it. Interestingly, it's part of spring, and being from western Kansas, grasshoppers were kind of a terrible thing. You know, they would come through and eat everything.
Yeah.
And so I guess my thought is, when you narrow it down to one, like, here we are, I hate to bring in war, but still, if you narrow it down to one grasshopper living its little grasshopper life, it's made by God, but then you put all the other grasshoppers together, which are also made by God. It just, to me, it's like a point to ponder. I don't really understand that in humanity or in insects.
Yeah. So the bane of farmers in Kansas, is that where you came from?
Yeah.
In other places, they try to get rid of too many invasive insects, but if you look closely at it, it's washing its face with its pale forearms,
Right.
and it's moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down. It's a really close look at a grasshopper, and isn't it funny when she says, I don't know exactly what a prayer is. There's a great irony there, right? Because she's praying by looking at creation so closely, and she knows exactly what prayer is. She's pulling one over on us, I think. But she knows how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel in the grass, how to be idle and blessed. What else should she be doing with her time than this miraculous holy thing? So,
Karen, there's nothing on the screen.
what? Where'd it go? Huh. That's strange.
I think that poem is a really beautiful example of being present,
Yeah,
you know.
talk about
and
that.
I feel the most connected to source whenever I am appreciating nature. So I love that poem, and I think it's really beautiful, and I love to look at things closely.
Yeah,
I love taking pictures of, you know, the detail of very small things like moss and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I just resonates, and I just love it. And you're right, she's praying,
yeah.
or at least, you know, being very present, which is
Yeah,
something that I strive for all the time.
yeah. That's, from a Unity perspective, we understand that kind of prayer, I think. Just being fully present and observant, either losing yourself or losing yourself in something is something that I think we all can relate to. Did you have a thought, James? Oh,
But I think, I was gonna say something.
Sure, yeah.
First too. I like the contrast, you know, between, as you were saying, you know, the microcosm, the small, and the macrocosm, you know, which we're talking about. And I think often we don't take the time to really look at the microcosm, you know, that which is really, you know, just so much of what life is. You know, we see sometimes the bigger picture, but we don't really see all that goes on to make up that bigger
Yeah.
picture.
and you really start to appreciate, you know, when you study math and fractals and you study physics and you see how patterns are repeated all throughout the universe, it really sort of is astonishing to think about your place in things in this close observation when you can see yourself in the actions of the grasshopper is a poetic reflection of that, I think. Elby has a thought.
Yeah, well, yesterday I was in a booth with a master naturalist, and one of the things they did was they had probably 15 different logs that were in various states of being rotten. And they had them on a mat, and they had some kneeling stuff around, and they had these little kids that would come up, and they had garden tools, and they pulled the logs apart and looked for insects. And and we had a bug box, and we could put them in there, and then they could look at them.
That's
And they looked at, there were several beetles and they were watching, their different, and the kids just got so into it. It was just amazing. And they found all these little things, and our whole purpose was to get people back to looking at nature and reflecting on it. And this poem is like just so perfect for that, because when we really think about what are we doing with our time, and what are we doing with where we are and how we are.
Yeah.
And I think this is wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's certainly a difference between Joyce Kilmer venerating a tree. He loves the tree. It's pressed to the earth's breast. It's raising its hands to God. That's lovely in its simplicity. And this is lovely in its complication. Completely different poetic impulse here. But, two beautiful spirits expressing. That's why we do this thing. Because Elby's saying it's important to get kids to look closely at nature. And it's fun to watch them do it. When they see those little bugs, they're anthropomorphizing. They're thinking about like those bugs as little reflections of themselves and little like people. And science always tells us not to do that, but I find I learn the most when I sort of see myself in a bug. But if people don't observe nature, we're lost. And I don't know if you've been on a college campus recently. I often would, when I taught, I'd see my students and I'd say, hey, how you doing? What, blah, blah, blah. And they wouldn't hear me.
No.
They have their things in their ears. And they think that's a positive because they have their own little space and that's a good thing. It's not a good thing. When people can't hear birds, they don't know that there are fewer of them.
I wanted to say something in regards to that too. I'm often on the bike trails here. We live right off one of the bike trails. I'm a big bicyclist. But it's politeness to always announce yourself before you're coming up behind somebody as you're passing them at 15 miles an hour, and they're at a walking pace. And honestly, I would say way more than half the time, 3/4 of the time at least, I'd say, they don't hear you because they've got the earbuds on. And I find a sadness in that, because I think I grew up at a time when there was no such thing as an earbud. But, I think we do lose that connection with nature when we're always connected to, the internet all the time. We're connected to, our digital life.
It's true. It's really good to have your own private moment, but people are going out on nature trails with earbuds. They're missing half the show if they can't hear the chattering of squirrels, and they can't hear the woodpecker. And if you can't hear it, it's not even there, and you don't miss it when it's gone, and it is going. These things are going. Bugs and birds,
One thing that brought up to me too is when I did take my bike trip going out to Maine, and I was riding with another bicyclist, and she was from Montreal, and that subject came up, and she said, well, in Montreal, if you have earbuds on the bike trail, you will get a $500 ticket.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because of the safety. It's not about nature or anything. It's about, you can't hear a car horn honking. You can't hear the things that are going to make you safer. And so they made a law against it.
You can't hear somebody calling for help. You can't hear a neighbor crying. You can't hear things like your fellow humans doing their human things, much less the things we're talking about. So, close observation, that the type that a poet does, brings us closer to creation. And we can express messages about creation too, that we want to share with people. And everybody kind of has a different take on what needs to be said and what's urgent. And these poems show what some people consider urgent. I'm going to read another Mary Oliver poem called Wild Geese. And let's just take a moment to look at geese before I do. Because you're in this room and you're not with nature, except like human nature, and there's some plants back there. There's always nature, right? But we're a little divorced from this kind of view of the natural world. So take a look, and then I'll read Wild Geese. Wild geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. Isn't that a good poem? She hears the honk honk of geese in flight and sees them announcing their place in the family of things. And that's another way, the grasshopper poem, she's looking closely at everything a grasshopper does and reflecting on what it means. But here, she starts with how she feels. What's expected of her. You do not have to be good. You don't have to repent. That's a unity type principle right there, isn't it? We are perfect, so we don't have to be good. So we just have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Just do what comes naturally. And that's where we belong, in the family of things, kind of. You like the poem?
Yeah.
So good, isn't she so good? Remember Mary Oliver. Go look her up.
I did.
Good. She's wonderful. Here's an older poem, and I want you to look at this. You know what kind of tree this is?
Birch.
It's a birch tree. This is how I think of them, straight and tall, and the bottoms are bare, and they stand in the forest, kind of like sentries. But this poem is about this view of birches, bent by the ice. So this is a poem by Robert Frost. Does anybody know Robert Frost's poem, Birches? This is such a good poem. I thought maybe we'd like to hear him read it. Not sure where the sound comes out. I'm going to put this
It should
up.
come out the speaker. From the computer, it should go through there and go out the speaker.
Okay. Here it is. I tried to bypass the ads. I hope one doesn't start. Here we go. Robert Frost himself reading his poem, Birches.
When I see birches bent to left and right across the lines of straighter, darker trees, I like to think some boy's been swinging them. But swinging doesn't bend them down to stay as ice storms do. Often you must have seen them loaded with ice a sunny winter morning after a rain. They click upon themselves as the breeze rises and turn many-colored as the stir cracks and creases their enamel. Soon the sun's warmth makes them shed crystal shells, shattering and avalanching on the snow crust. Such heaps of broken glass to sweep away, you'd think the inner dome of heaven had fallen. They are dragged to the withered bracken by the load, and they seem not to break. Though once they're bowed so low for long, they never right themselves. You may see their trunks arching in the woods years afterward, trailing their leaves on the ground like girls on hands and knees that throw their hair before them over their heads to dry in the sun. But
In case you can't hear very well, let's catch up before we continue. He is saying, let me see here. I'm having a terrible time with a non-Mac. First he says, when I see birches bend to left and right across the lines of straighter, darker trees, I like to think some boy's been swinging them. Isn't that whimsical? Can you hear Robert Frost, or do you want me to read you the poem? You can hear him okay? Yeah. Okay, that's good. But it's sort of an old recording. But swinging doesn't bend them down to stay like ice storms do. Ice storms cause permanent harm, whereas a boy swinging, it kind of takes some of that. And he had a beautiful image. They seem not to break, though once they are bound for so low for long, they never right themselves. You may see their trunks arching in the woods, years afterwards, trailing their leaves on the ground, like girls on hands and knees that throw their hair before them over their heads to dry in the sun. Isn't that so great? This, by the way, is what makes poetry good, when it's fresh. When you've never, ever thought of birches as girls with their hair thrown to dry, right? Yes?
As a writer and author, I've always found an interest in where do the words come from?
Yeah, that is the key
I mean,
question.
That is really the key to our innate sense of who we are, and sometimes a word we've never used before.
Yes.
It may be a thought that maybe we've read somewhere, or two different disparate thoughts that we put together
Yes.
into a new thought.
They feel like gifts when they show up.
And Robert Frost is really one of the best writers, I've always thought.
Yes.
The ability to transcend language in such a way that it brings a new understanding to what the words mean,
It's true.
or what they can mean. And I think that is the key to reading and vocabulary, and understanding what it is we're looking at, what we're reading. But I think one of the things that Frost really did at his age, years ago when he was initially writing, and why he became so famous, was because he could do this. He could take people to places they wouldn't otherwise go. And all of his writing seems to do that, at least for me. It takes me to places that it creates like a wow effect.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to a place I haven't been, but I can't wait to get there.
Yeah. And we look at some of his poems that seem very simplistic. Like, I think we all know Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. It goes, whose woods these are, I do not know. But he's going to the village, and he sees a place where he can take one road or the other road. And then he says, but as for that, my passing there had warned them really about the same. He's making this tortured decision about which path to take. He wants to take, oh no, it's the road less traveled that does this. He wants to take the road less traveled, but they're the same, except for when I go down them, like as my passing there had warned them really about the same. He says they're the same. But he's in agony in this big poem. Which way should I go? I want to take the road less traveled. Well, how ridiculous, right? And he means it to be ridiculous. A ridiculous choice between two things that are largely the same. You can't tell by looking. Of course, whatever road you go on is going to take you somewhere where you see different things and experience different things. But you can't look at two paths that are worn the same and really be that tortured about the road less traveled, right? So sometimes he's very simplistic in appearance, but not at all simplistic, because he's talking about how foolish we are for maundering over things that don't matter, right? Because there are things that do matter that we could think about. You have a thought?
Well, so much of it is to move beyond the status quo. That's basically a lot of what he's saying.
Yeah.
He's saying that the road that everyone takes to go away to a certain way is commonly used. But to go on a path that's less traveled, to see new vistas or new ways of going basically to the same place.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what we all need to be doing, in my opinion, is looking at different ways that fit our own sense of who we are.
Yes.
Following our own path that we have yet to create.
Right.
And that's really the key. And I think that's what Frost is telling us.
I think that's a very good reading of the poem. But he's also kind of, if you read it closely, he's kind of saying that the paths themselves, his metaphor, maybe doesn't serve that well because they're practically identical. Let's return to birches.
I was going to say, when truth broke in with all her matter of fact about the ice storm, I should prefer to have had some boy bend them as he went out or in to fetch the cows, some boy too far from town to learn baseball, whose only play was what he found himself, summer or winter, and could play alone. One by one he subdued his father's trees by riding them down over and over again, until he took the stiffness out of them, and not one but hung limp, not one was left for him to conquer. He learned all there was to learn about not launching out too soon, and so not carrying the tree.
I accidentally turned it off, but he learned about not launching out too soon as he was bending his dad's trees. Let's go back in, sorry.
Away clear to the ground, he always kept his poise to the top branches, climbing carefully with the same pains you used to fill a cup up to the brim and even above the brim. Then he flung outward, feet first with a swish, kicking his way down through the air to the ground. So was I once myself a swinger of birches, and so I dream of going back to be. It's when I'm weary of considerations, and life is too much like a pathless wood where your face burns and tickles with the cobwebs broken across it, and one eye is weeping from a twig's having lashed across it open. I'd like to get away from earth a while, and then come back to it and begin over. May no fate willfully misunderstand me and half grant what I wish and snatch me away not to return. Earth's the right place for love. I don't know where it's likely to go better. I'd like to go by climbing a birch tree and climb black branches up a snow-white trunk toward heaven till the tree could bear no more but dipped its top and set me down again. That would be good both going and coming back. One could do worse than be a swinger of birches.
Did you catch that? Let's review something. I know, that's a great poem, and it's not one of his most famous ones, but I think it should be. He says he'd like to go back to boyhood and swing on the birches. He'd like to get away from earth a while and then come back to it and begin over. I'm quoting here. May no fate willfully misunderstand me and half grant what I wish and snatch me away not to return. Earth's the right place for love. I don't know where it's likely to go better. He says that swinging on birches would be good both going and coming. He thinks heaven would be kind of he wants to go toward heaven, but he doesn't want to be snatched away to heaven because Earth's the right place for love. Observation?
Well, in many ways that has a Buddhist connotation.
Yeah.
In that the idea of leaving to return, of doing what you do here now, but knowing that you will return at a future time. And I think that's so much of the power, I think, of Frost's writing is that the ability for you to encapsulate for yourself the meaning of what he's saying. And I think that's the strength of a good writer.
Yeah.
And particularly great poetry is that it allows you to become one with it. And I think his writing is really one of the best examples of the ability to do that. But to swing away and return,
Yeah.
that's amazing.
Yeah,
that
that's
has a real interesting connotation.
Yeah. I love that too.
When I was a kid, and this is for girls as well as boys, but when I was a kid, we had a tree that had fallen down, and beside it was a young tree. And we used to walk up the old tree and climb to the top of the young one and then swing it down. And this is like, oh my gosh, the feeling of doing that, when you go back to that,
Yeah.
it's just plain fun.
It is fun.
And it's so, hearing this is like, wow, this is like cool.
Yeah.
I remember doing that, and it just put you right there in the moment because you had to pay attention.
Yeah.
And it just puts you right there. It's just, this is really cool.
I like that it triggers memory, and writing is that way. It triggers memory for us. And when we can reconnect to the nature that we rolled around in, and the things that we picked, and the stuff that we ate that we shouldn't have, and all the stuff we did when we were kids out in nature, that's so good for the earth. If we can remind people that it is our like almost literal mother that we like clung to, because people in offices aren't clinging to earth right now. Not so much, not the typical office. So poet can take us back to those times. You have a thought?
When I was a kid, we lived in St. Pete, Florida, and we had an empty lot next to us, and it had a great big, huge, small leaf banyan tree, and lots, we could climb to the top, and it was at least 60 feet up to the top of that tree, and we'd stand up there, and the wind would blow, and we'd sway, and it was just so peaceful. It was like an escape. There were 5 girls in my family, and it was an escape. It was a nice place to be.
You should write about that. Have you thought about writing about that? Capturing that memory?
Yeah.
You know, that memory, unless you're telling people close to you about it, that kind of goes when you go.
Yeah.
You should write that stuff down. We should all be writing this stuff down. I wanted to go into haiku now, this Japanese form. It's very old form, and we think of it, we learn it in school because it's easy to teach children a haiku. 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. Well, that's not really, that's sort of a Western adoption of haiku, but I don't think the original Japanese form exactly has syllables. They call it breaths or sounds. It's a poem that you're supposed to be able to say in a breath, and I don't fully understand the distinction, but I know that Basho was not counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's not exactly what was happening there. There's a kind of an important process in a haiku. It is an observation of nature. It contains a reference to a season, and typically it could be expressed in a breath, and typically it's not all the time, but it often compares to unlike things. So what it ends up being then is a little meditation. It might only be 3 lines long, but it's 3 lines that somebody might have labored for months over. So it's something that doesn't just happen in an instant, but it's a result of close meditation. Does that sound right to you, Dan? Did I sum up a haiku reasonably?
I think so. I've never really been that much into because it's just structure.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know me, whatever, but structure has never been something I've been.
Dan is turned off to structure in haiku, but he's really turned off to structure, I think, in American idea of haiku. I don't know if an actual Japanese haiku.
It's hard to know.
Before you read all those nice haikus, you've kind of ruined my favorite haiku.
Oh, I
which is,
have.
Haikus are easy, but sometimes they don't make sense. Refrigerate.
I still love it. It's a good commentary on the classroom haiku. And my son recently got just high praise, and he's not a kid who gets a lot of high praise. It's usually a lot of don't do that, don't do that. But he recently got high praise for his cinquain writing, another syllabic form where it's like two word, or it's not syllables, it's words, like 2 words, 4 words, 6 words, 8 words, 2 words. And he knocked it out of the park. He's like, poet laureate, Mom, I got this. So it's absolutely nothing like I do as a poet. For me, being a poet, it's a holy calling. I sit at my desk and I try to make discoveries, and I try to find truth, and I try to I am writing, I've mentioned this image before, but I write with my hand and I'm writing, and sometimes when you work hard and live right and maybe suffer enough, probably not in the Unity mindset, but when you put in the toil, sometimes something writes back to you from the other side of the page. It's like your pens are touching, but then you can read something in it, you know? Dan has a thought.
Yeah, the first book I had published in China was basically a poetry style. And then I decided to put it on my foundation's website, and WordPress wouldn't let me do that.
Oh, really?
I had to do it in a sentence type thing and not broken up into a poem.
Wow.
And it drove me nuts.
Blasphemy.
Because I had this whole book that I wanted to just move over to the software, but the software wouldn't let me do that.
Oh, man.
And it made me think about it a lot differently.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't, now I could have gone to another software, which may have been the answer, but but anyway, poetry is really great because it breaks things up in a way we don't normally, my mind normally, for me, doesn't always work that way.
Yeah.
So when you break it up into a poem as a thought type thing, it makes you see things differently as it comes together.
Yeah, I'd go along with that. Something about the brokenness makes you see it differently. I hadn't really thought about it in that way, but that's why I don't write prose poems. Let's look at a few of these haiku, see if we can recognize the traits I mentioned. Mention of the seasons. Now there's another form called senru. It looks very much like a haiku, but it's about human nature. But haiku are about nature. So these are some haiku. 3 of them are by Basho, who is sort of the master haiku. Yes?
Would you define haiku?
Haiku is a Japanese form, and they usually have 3 lines, and they're about nature, and that's probably enough to say about them. They mention the season. So this is a haiku. Plural of haiku, haiku. If somebody tells you they write haikus, tell them they're doing it wrong because it's haiku. From time to time, the clouds give rest to the moon beholders. I love that. It's beautiful, isn't it? In the cicada's cry, no sign can foretell how soon it must die. The cicada is just this portent of its own death. That's what we think of the cicada as. It's this tiny short life that it lives above ground. This one is not Basho, it's Murakami Kijo. First autumn morning, the mirror I stare into shows my father's face. Doesn't seem to be about nature, but it is nature reflected in his face, right? I have a half brother I never knew very well, but he friended me on Facebook, and he posted a picture of himself. He's just sitting in the dark in front of his computer, and he's sort of just sitting there, and it's kind of like grayscale, and I looked at him, I thought, my God, I'm looking at my father. He looked exactly like my father. It just arrested me, but I see that moment in this poem. The mirror I stare into shows my father's face. Basho again. An old silent pond. A frog jumps into the pond. Splash. Silence again. All of this is sort of reflective of life, right? You go along, and then something happens, and then you're back to this. Yeah. Okay, so I like to try to finish up by 10, and it's almost 10. So I think I had some stuff to show you here. I thought it might be nice to end on, Paul had mentioned Maya Angelou as a Unity person. So I have whoops. I wish you could see this. Any tips? James, you're good at this
I
stuff.
can never figure out that computer. I think the computer is just so old, it's not.
Ah, I gotcha. Well, I queued up something that you won't be able to see, but you can hear. This is a poem by Maya Angelou. called a prayer. So we'll finish with this. Then we won't even need to do our own prayer. We're covered. Okay, here we go. It's, by the way, not really a nature poem.
Father, Mother God, thank you for your presence during the hard and lean days, for then we have you to lean upon. Thank you for your presence during the bright and sunny days, for then we can share that which we have with those who have less. And thank you for your presence during the holy days, for then we are able to celebrate you and our families and our friends. For those who have no voice, we ask you to speak. For those who feel unworthy, we ask you to pour your love out in waterfalls of tenderness. For those who live in pain, we ask you to bathe them in the river of your healing. For those who are lonely, we ask you to keep them company. For those who are depressed, we ask you to shower upon them the light of hope. Dear Creator, you, the borderless sea of substance, we ask you to give all the world that which we need most: peace.
So there's a prayer for you today by our fellow Unity person, Maya. Note, it's not really a poem about nature, but she's relying very heavily on nature to sort of say what she wants to say to God. I suppose that's the common language that we share with God, is the language of creation. So it makes a lot of sense, I think. Now, we are done. Are there any announcements for today? Are you the announcement person?
Yeah, I guess I.
All right, thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you so much, Karen. That was phenomenal. I want everybody to let her know how much we appreciate her. Okay.
With some of that, honey?
Did I not?
No, just about the announcements. Do you
Oh,
know?
yeah. No, I don't know them, and that's what I was going to say. I'm going to announce that I don't know the announcements.
Well,
I think they're here.
a couple things that I do know
Okay, we have announcements.
are that Dan's plants back there, we're gonna be selling those today yet. They're $4 a plant or 6 for 20. They are chemical-free and organic, so buy those plants up. We would so appreciate that. And then after service today, we had food left over from our event. So we're gonna have, as long as the pasta holds out, we're gonna have pasta for anybody who wants to stay after service today. We want to thank our Planet Unity sponsors and volunteers and donors. We are gonna do a bigger celebration of this next week. But what we do know at this point is that we have made $6,000 plus on this event. Yeah, so it's been amazing. But even beyond that, just the incredible camaraderie of everybody who was here during the week to help on the weekend, and then all the people who came that have really become interested in our church, who found out about us. And we had numerous people say, wow, you know, I love the inclusivity, the diversity, the things that you guys do. So it's like, yay, but the education for people as well. So this Thursday, April 28th at 6:30, there is a wrap-up meeting for anybody who was involved in the Planet Unity Committee, and any volunteers who may have suggestions for how we can work smarter, not harder, next year. Let's see, next week, and I could have just given this back to you, I'm sorry.
I'm enjoying this.
Okay. Next week, at the 9:15 New Thought class is gonna be Amy Burnett on the topic of prosperity. And some great news too. We received 100% of the money that we needed to pay for our outdoor stage. Now, not only did we receive 100% of it, we needed to add steps, which was like another $250, and that was even covered. So we have paid for the stage, so that's very exciting.
And it was not cheap either. I know it was over $2,500.
Yeah, about $2,500.
I mean, that's
and-
phenomenal.
Plus
and
$250.
blood, sweat, and tear, and not no tears.
Well, there were a few
And no blood, maybe blood, I don't know, but sweat. My class on self-care and life balance continues this Wednesday at 6:30. Save the date for the Spring Boutique if you have some clothes that you want to donate for that, but save the date is going to be Friday, May 6th. Mary Lou Rao's 89th birthday is coming up. Her address is at the door if you'd like to send her a birthday card. Next Sunday is our town hall meeting. And so we're excited. Please plan on coming to the town hall. It is a potluck, so please bring a dish to share for that. And we're going to be, talking about the church, but we're also going to have somebody from Sun Solar come and talk to us about the possibility of solar panels for us. And if we did move forward with that, we would be the first church in Springfield to have solar panels, which how cool would that be? But, we have to look at that as the bigger picture too, so. Okay.
Sue,
Yes.
I heard, because I was in here when they announced it, on the kids raffle, the person that won the kids raffle donated that money back to the kids.
Oh,
Yes.
they donated it back to, that was Steve Ames.
Yes, and he donated the whole thing back to the kids, so the kids got that double wrap,
That's
double money for
awesome. So
rally.
that Steve Ames and he when he got the tickets, he said, "I'm going to win," and he won. And so he donated that back to the kids. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Did anybody see KY3 last?
Yeah, we were on
Yeah,
KY3.
we were on KY3.
Yeah, so we got Planet Unity on KY3 a number of times yesterday, so that was pretty exciting too. Next year, we're going to figure out how to get on there before the event.
Yes.
So we can have more people come. But if you didn't have the opportunity to come out for it, I think most everybody did. It was an amazing event, and mark it on your calendars for next year. Thank you, honey.
That's always our greatest fundraiser here at church, and it's our biggest event of the year. And we tie so many things into it with the plant sale, with Dan, with the yard sale, with food, all the activities,
The
all the
education.
music, the education. I mean, there's so much, and
We're
I'm wiped out.
we were laughing last night. Some of us stayed for a little while after on the deck and had a couple beers. And it was the funniest part of but the funniest part of it was we're sitting out there, and this is after a week long of just effort. And so we get done, and we all go to get up, and seriously, if you could have seen us all, we're all just like getting up like this because our bodies were just so exhausted, and we just started cracking up like, oh my gosh. And then for Paul and I this morning, it took me an hour to feel like I had anything in me, and it was just But it was
all day yesterday. You danced all day yesterday.
It was joyous effort though. It was joyous effort.
Thank you all so much for coming. Let's get in our circle again.